The truck stopped on the shoulder seemed like an obvious cry for help, but the wrecked cab told me something else. Someone had set up a stage. Good evening, this is Travis Cole. I'm 46 years old. I drive mainly in the southwestern United States from California to New Mexico, and I spend more time in the cab than in any house. I'm telling you this because many people still think the biggest danger on the road is falling asleep, brake failure, or a flat tire. What almost took me off the road for good was the desire to help. It was nearly 2 in the morning when I was driving down I-40, leaving Gallup toward Albuquerque, with a semi-trailer loaded with auto parts. The radio was just static. The traffic had disappeared more than 20 minutes ago, and that open, dry stretch with few U-turns gave the feeling that the world had shrunk until it was just traffic lights, asphalt, and silence. I was driving cautiously because of the crosswind, which likes to push the trailer around without warning. It was at this pace that I saw, up ahead, a set of flickering red lights, as if a truck were stopped with its hazard lights on, and something was hitting the bodywork. I slowed down a little, pure trucker instinct, not wanting to leave another stranded on the road. As I got closer, the first minor inconvenience appeared. The safety triangle was carelessly placed, almost lying down at an odd angle, more for decoration than as a warning. It wasn't a triangle hastily assembled, but one carefully put together. It was as if someone had placed it there simply for visual purposes. I turned off the autopilot, checked the rearview mirror, pulled my truck onto the shoulder, and slowed down until I stopped a few meters behind it. I could have driven straight past, of course, but when you spend your whole life depending on strangers seeing you in the dark, ignoring another stopped truck is almost like betraying your own profession. I turned off the radio, let the engine idle, and looked through the windshield. The truck ahead was a white tractor unit with a box trailer, without any company logo I recognized. The license plate was from another state, too dirty to read quickly. Hazard lights were on, but no open doors, no silhouette, no movement. The second minor concern arose when I noticed that the taillights were working perfectly, but the side of the trunk was too clean, without a scratch, without any sign of a dent, without anything that would justify stopping there. It was as if the problem was concentrated in the cabin, invisible from my point of view. I grabbed the flashlight, almost automatically put on my reflective vest, left my cell phone in my shirt pocket, and engaged the parking brake. Before getting out, I looked in the mirror. My load was light, but valuable. If someone wanted to take that truck, it would be a good target. The thought came quickly and passed. I still believed the biggest risk was finding someone injured. As I stepped onto the cold asphalt, I felt the wind pick up, raising a dry smell of earth and hot rubber. The two trucks formed a metal corridor on the shoulder, creating shade between them. I walked alongside mine, keeping my distance from the road, and each step seemed to make the silence thicker. When I got to the back of the parked truck, I noticed there were no cones, no tape, no trace of fallen cargo, nothing on the asphalt. That kind of emptiness that bothers you. I raised my flashlight, illuminated the rear. A common seal, a simple padlock, nothing broken. If there was a problem, it wasn't with the cargo. I turned to the cabin. That's when I saw what really puzzled me. The driver's side door was ajar, not fully closed, as if someone had left in a hurry. On the paintwork, there were long scratches running from the door handle to the step, as if a boot had scraped down. On the gravel floor just below, there were deep sole marks, 2 more pronounced depressions, as if someone had been pushed and tried to brace themselves. My heart raced a little, not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't see. There was no blood, no long trail, just those footprints ending there, erased afterward by the wind or a tire. The next micro-tension came when I realized that the footprints seemed almost identical to each other, as if the same sole had been stamped on the ground with too much care. I stepped up a step, lightly touched the door, and it opened with a dry snap. The interior light didn't turn on. I pointed the flashlight inside and for a few seconds ignored everything around me. The cabin looked like it had exploded without fire. Cracked dashboard, radio hanging by intact wires, upholstery torn as if someone had repeatedly run a blade across it, objects scattered in an overly theatrical way. There was an empty soda bottle lying on the floor exactly in the middle of the carpet, a baseball cap stuck between the pedals, and a destroyed cell phone on the passenger seat, its screen shattered, but perfectly supported, as if someone had put it there to be seen. It was an organized mess, and that doesn't fit with a real accident. I leaned in a little further, and another micro-tension appeared. The driver's seatbelt was locked, fastened in its buckle, as if someone had driven normally up to the point where I was looking at the truck. If there had been a sudden stop, a crash, or a fight inside the cab, it was almost certain that the belt would have come undone or been pulled out. Not there. It was in place. Clean. Taut. It was at that moment that I felt the vulnerability hit me. Half my body was leaning into a cabin that wasn't mine, my flashlight pointed at the mess, my back completely exposed to the dark shoulder of the road. I remembered my own truck behind me, the cargo, the idling engine. If anyone wanted to get me out of there, that was the best time. Backing away isn't natural when you believe someone needs help. That's why I didn't back away immediately. I kept looking at the details. The passenger side window was broken, but the pattern of the shards bothered me. Too much glass for such a localized impact. Worse, no large shards on the seat, as if someone had cleaned it before staging the scene. My mind started to conjure a scenario I didn't want to admit. Instead of a driver in distress, maybe I'd found a staged scene to look like distress. A cheap charade to lure someone like me closer. And if that someone didn't show up, they could wait for the next one. Helpful truckers are never lacking in the early morning hours. I stepped down slowly, trying to look like just another guy analyzing a mechanical problem. I turned off the flashlight for a second to see if my eyes would adjust to the dark. It was in this partial darkness that the strongest microvoltage of the night appeared. Up ahead, on the other side of the road beyond the guardrail, I saw a low, static glow that wasn't a star or a moving headlight. It looked like a distant reflection on a dark windshield. I kept my breathing under control and turned the flashlight back on, this time pointing it at the ground, pretending I just wanted to get a better look at the footprints. I crouched down near them, as if checking the pattern. That's when I noticed another mistake. The soles imprinted in the gravel were all the same depth, as if the weight had been distributed equally across all stages. It wasn't a desperate run. It was repetition. If someone had actually been pushed, there would have been a stumble, a drag, a crooked mark, something out of the ordinary. There, each mark looked like its sister. That's when it really hit me. There was no driver in trouble. There was someone who wanted me to believe that. Without looking up, I reached into my shirt pocket and squeezed my cell phone, as if it were just a casual gesture. I unlocked it by touch, opened the dialer, and left my finger on the 9. I wasn't going to call anyone yet, but I wanted a shortcut ready. At the same time, I started mentally calculating the distance to my door, the time to shift gears, and the space to quickly get back into my lane. I started walking slowly back toward my truck, playing the role of someone who had given up looking at the cab and was going to get a tool. Each step was a new micro-tension, because I felt, more than saw, that I was no longer alone in looking. Someone, somewhere in the darkness, had realized that I had noticed. When I reached my horse, I climbed the first step without turning my back completely to the road. I opened the door, got in, and locked it in the same movement. Only then did I release the breath I had been holding without noticing. I turned on the high beams, bathed the rearview mirror in light, then leaned to the other side, trying to catch any suspicious reflections. Nothing obvious appeared. I engaged idle gear, released the parking brake, and began to slowly pull the vehicle forward, as if just repositioning it. When I aligned with the bait truck, a final detail confirmed everything. There at the far end of the shoulder, for a second too quick, 2 bright points, like someone's eyes reflecting my light, appeared among a pile of stones and then disappeared. I didn't wait any longer. I floored it, pulled back into the lane, politely signaled with the turn signal that nobody would see, and left the truck behind, now tiny in the mirror. I only slowed down when the tachograph was already showing much more than I usually admit aloud. I drove for several kilometers with the feeling that I had let someone down, as if there was indeed an injured driver back there needing help. That's how the trap holds up. It uses the guilt of those who don't want to be cowards. But that morning the math didn't add up. There was no blood. There were no signs of a genuine struggle. There was just a scene. When I arrived at a 24-hour gas station further ahead, I briefly recounted what I had seen to the attendant and another truck driver who was having coffee. One of them shook his head and said he had heard similar stories in that stretch of road, about trucks stopped on blind curves, abandoned vans with their doors open, always empty, always with something too strange. I didn't call the police at that time. Maybe I should have. Maybe someone passed by after me and decided to stop, their heart aching. Or maybe those eyes reflecting on the roadside understood that that night the bait hadn't worked and it was better to pack up the scene and try somewhere else. I don't have a nice lesson to conclude this. I only know that since then, a truck parked too often in the wrong place is no longer just a colleague with mechanical problems in my mind. It can be an invitation to never reach the destination. That morning, the only burden I truly delivered was my own skin. If you're enjoying these chilling stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any more terrifying tales to come. Now, get ready for another journey down dark and mysterious roads. When I saw two SUVs without license plates following me down US 95, I figured it might just be that typical feeling a driver gets when crossing Nevada for hours without seeing a soul. But there was something different about the way they kept their distance, as if they were monitoring my truck's every move. I didn't immediately think much of it because in that region anything strange can seem like a mirage. The desert distorts perception, irritates the retina, and tests patience. But that day the feeling didn't seem to be caused by the heat or the monotony of the road. It was something solid, urgent, like an invisible weight inside the cab. I didn't know it yet, but it wasn't my rear-view mirrors they were studying. It was what was hidden inside my fuel tank. The route was simple: Las Vegas to Reno, cutting through the desert at a time when the light seems to double because of the suspended dust. Transporting industrial products, regular documentation, a check done at the warehouse with nothing to raise suspicion. The truck was the same as always, a worn-out classic but reliable enough to handle long climbs and steep drops without complaint. But as I drove on, I began to feel something strange in the engine's behavior. It wasn't a misfire or a stutter. It was as if the weight was distributed differently, as if something was occupying more space than it should in some compartment. My first hypothesis was some abnormal accumulation of fuel, but the gauges were normal. I tried to ignore it to avoid fueling paranoia. The SUVs remained there, alternating positions, always two, always black, always with windows so dark it was impossible to see who was driving. I drove through Tonopah expecting them to enter the city, but they didn't. They stayed behind, camouflaged in the sparse traffic. Sometimes they would disappear for a few minutes, then reappear, too synchronized to be a coincidence. When they finally parked at an isolated gas station and watched while I filled up, I realized there was a direction to it. I just didn't know which one. Near Coaldale Junction, I noticed something that took my breath away for a moment. The fuel gauge had barely dropped, even though I'd driven over 100 miles since my last fill-up. It didn't make sense. I got out to check for leaks. No strong smell, no stains on the asphalt. The sound of the liquid inside the tank as it sloshed sounded off, thicker, as if something was mixed in. It hit me like a cold blade. I'd personally filled up in Vegas, seen the attendant install the pump. There was no way to tamper with anything without drawing attention, unless it wasn't during the fill-up itself. I struggled to admit it, but the idea lingered, persistent. The truck had been serviced the previous night. Nothing major, just a routine checkup and filter change. I left it in the yard and returned the next day. That was the only window of time someone could have put something in the tank without me noticing. When I realized it, my blood boiled as if I were driving with a fever. If they had tampered with the tank, it wasn't fuel they were looking for. It was something else. Something that needed to travel unnoticed between cities, seemingly insignificant, but valuable enough to warrant a chase. The SUV's approach became more open, almost brazen. They didn't want me to believe it was a coincidence. They wanted me to understand they were there because of my route. I tried to calculate how long it would take to reach Fallon, at least 2 hours, if everything went well. But in the middle of the desert, going well is asking too much. A little further on, I saw one of the SUVs overtake and slow down in front of me, as if marking its territory. The other stayed behind, closing the pincer movement. They didn't quite block me, but they made it clear they could if they wanted to. It was a message. I kept driving, trying to maintain a steady pace so as not to attract more attention. I thought about stopping at a police station, but in that area that would be like running into an empty building. Besides, if what I imagined inside the tank was real, explaining it to any authority would be the ultimate nightmare. There's no innocent way to justify a clandestine cargo hidden in fuel, especially when you yourself don't know what it is. When I stopped at a rest area to check the external cables and buy some time, I noticed the SUVs slowing down a few meters ahead, as if they were afraid to get too close. That caught my attention. They wanted the truck, but they didn't want to get near the tank. This detail disproved all the normal hypotheses. If it was something valuable, they stole it from the wrong place. If it was something dangerous, they didn't want it to explode near them. I began to observe the behavior of the two vehicles more calmly. They never stayed side by side for very long. They alternated positions as if each one assumed a function. One monitored, the other tracked. This indicated organization. They weren't common thieves. They also didn't seem like federal agents, because federal agents don't hide so easily. Much less a cartel, because cartels don't fear being approached. The only logical explanation was worse. Someone was using my truck as camouflage transport, and those SUVs were the party that wasn't informed, or the party that was betrayed. I continued to the most deserted region before reaching the Fallon Mountains. The engine began to vibrate in an almost metallic way. I knew my truck. It didn't do that. It was as if something was loose inside the tank, rattling, rubbing against the inner walls. My heart leaped because at that moment I realized it wasn't just contraband. It was something rigid, perhaps contained within some kind of capsule, floating in the fuel or trapped in some makeshift frame. Nobody hides something like that with good intentions. The vibration grew stronger, almost as if something were repeatedly hitting metal. The road remained deserted, the sky began to darken, and the desert lost its yellowish light, gaining bluish tones that made everything quieter. The SUVs closed the distance, as if waiting for the right moment to act. It was then, as I passed a small rise, that I noticed the headlights of both vehicles widening to the sides, as if they had received some kind of signal. They didn't want to collide with me. They wanted to force me to stop. The decision I made wasn't rational. It was instinct. I accelerated down the hill, using the truck's weight to gain speed. This made the tank shake even more, increasing the internal noise, but it also prevented the SUVs from getting closer. They didn't expect me to react. Maybe they thought I would cooperate when I realized they were seriously surrounding me. But nobody cooperates when they don't even know what they're accused of. In the next section, I spotted a dirt track used by maintenance trucks working on high-voltage power lines. It was narrow but accessible. I steered the truck to the right and entered the track. The SUVs took a few seconds to react. That was enough for me to gain some distance. But that track was dangerous. Loose rocks, deep sand, blind curves, risk of tipping over. I used the route as far as I could, and then hid the truck behind a rock formation wide enough to cover a good part of the truck bed. I got out quickly, left the cab open, and ran to the tank. The internal vibration was stronger. I touched the metal. It was too hot for a truck that didn't have a real malfunction. That confirmed everything I feared. Something inside the tank wasn't just stored, it was active. I heard the SUVs stopping in the distance, their engines muffled by the desert wind. They didn't come straight at me. They approached slowly, cautiously. They knew what it was about. I didn't, and that put me in an even worse position. I stood there, assessing the tank as if I could see through it. There were three possibilities: something biological, something chemical, or something technological. Their behavior indicated a fear of explosion, so I ruled out the third. They didn't want to get too close. This suggested that the risk was the contact itself. Perhaps something that couldn't leak. Something that needed to be transported without anyone suspecting. The SUVs turned off their headlights, a clear sign of strategic approach. They weren't there to talk, nor to negotiate, only to recover what was inside my truck, whatever the cost. And at that moment, for the first time, I realized I wasn't just a victim. I was a witness. The wind kicked up fine dust that scratched my throat. The shadows of the vehicles approached slowly, almost dragging on the ground. And when I finally saw the silhouettes splitting up, skirting the rocks to try and flank me, I understood what I needed to do. There was no way to escape with the truck. There was no way to explain it to the police. There was no way to trust them. The responsibility fell on me in a brutal way. If what was inside the tank was as dangerous as it seemed, it couldn't fall back into the wrong hands. There was no way to transport it to a safe place. There was no way to isolate it. There was only one way out. The Nevada desert is vast, silent, and indifferent. It swallows things, big things, small things, things that should never have existed. The SUVs didn't know I'd already figured it out. They didn't know I was willing to sacrifice the entire truck. And when they finally got too close, expecting me to give up, they heard only the sound no one there wanted to hear. The dry click of the drain valve starting to turn. Their silence lasted a second, enough for me to confirm that, in that game, the only advantage I had was being the only one who didn't know exactly what was inside the tank. But I knew enough to make the decision that no one else would have the courage to make. And that's how I realized that night, I wasn't the target. The target was something that should never have been put in my truck. Good evening. My name is Mark Wilson. I'm 43 years old and I spend more time looking at I-10 road signs than my own backyard. I'm telling you what happened because I learned the wrong way that when someone over-organizes the road for you, it's not maintenance, it's intention. I was driving from Pensacola to Jacksonville with a load of electrical equipment, nothing valuable enough to attract attention in theory, but worth enough for someone who understands quick resale. It was a muggy night, a heavy sky, almost no cars on the road. It was that time of day when the highway seems disconnected from the rest of the world, and any detail out of place starts to scream out. The first warning wasn't visual. It was my dashboard beeping indicating automatic braking was off, as if the system had lost its bearings for a few seconds. I looked ahead and didn't see anything unusual. Clear lanes, a free shoulder, no traffic lights approaching in the rearview mirror. Even so, I reduced my speed by a few kilometers per hour without thinking too much. That's when I noticed 3 small orange dots up ahead, burning low on the asphalt. At first I thought it was just a broken-down car with someone trying to signal. But as I got closer, the shape began to become clear. It wasn't a streak of light. It wasn't a crooked drawing. It was a precise figure. The 3 markers formed an almost perfect triangle right in the middle of the right lane. They weren't lying down. They weren't misaligned. They didn't look like the result of someone's desperate rush to abandon everything. They seemed calmly placed, carefully considered by someone who knew exactly what they wanted the driver to feel. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road before reaching the figure, keeping the engine running and my foot ready on the brake. I turned off the high beams for a few seconds just to see how the warning lights behaved in the dark. The intensity was too strong for something that had been left there for hours. It had only been turned on a short time ago. I climbed out of the cab, feeling the humid heat rising from the asphalt. The night was too quiet for such a long stretch of road. Not a distant truck, not a small car accelerating, not that constant noise of tires in motion that you get used to hearing even from a distance. Only the crackling of the flares burning. I approached the figure and noticed the tire marks. There was a recent skid mark starting a few meters before the triangle and ending right at the edge. The rubber still had a strong smell. Someone had braked right there, probably at the last minute, and then simply disappeared without leaving the vehicle. In the center of the triangle, there was a phone lying on the ground. It wasn't broken, it wasn't destroyed, just without a battery. The screen was completely dark, the body scratched, but intact. The position wasn't random. The device was right where any driver would reflexively step on it to pick it up. I picked up the phone with my fingertips and turned my back to the woods, as if distracted. My whole body was telling me not to turn my back on the darkness on that side of the road. There were no lampposts, no houses, no distant farm lights. Just a corridor of low trees forming an irregular wall. It was there that the first real sense of danger appeared. It wasn't a loud sound. It was the absence of sound. No crickets chirping, no wind rustling through leaves, no distant truck. It was as if that stretch of highway had been put on pause while someone waited for the wrong decision. I pretended to go back to the cabin without thinking too much, and before getting in, I glanced quickly in the right rearview mirror. In the reflection, right on the edge between the shoulder and the woods, a figure took a step back. Not enough to be seen by any distracted person. Just enough for someone who lives by the road to know they weren't alone. I got into the truck feigning the usual haste of someone wanting to get out of an unfamiliar place quickly. I locked the door, turned on the high beams, and let the engine rev slowly. Instead of driving straight ahead, I first pulled the steering wheel slightly toward the shoulder, widening the angle to illuminate as much of the right side as possible. The beam of light caught the edge of the vegetation and revealed details I had expected to find. A branch broken at waist height, the mark of a light sole stepping on soft earth, a thin trail descending into the shadow. It wasn't the footprint of a truck driver. It was someone lighter, probably wearing sneakers, walking without carrying weight. I accelerated, but kept my speed below normal, as if I were still undecided about what I had seen. I didn't want to give anyone there the certainty that I had understood the trap. Whoever sets up a scenario like that depends on the victim misinterpreting the situation. The perfect target is the driver who trusts too much in the appearance of an emergency. When the triangle shrunk in the mirror, a new tension arose. The feeling that I had left that point unscathed, but had left the trap set for the next person to pass. And on I-10, there's always someone next, even at times when the highway seems otherworldly. I drove in silence for a few minutes until I saw what I didn't want to see. A set of lights stopped further ahead, outside of any rest area. A truck was parked awkwardly, occupying half the shoulder and squeezing the lane. One of the headlights was out, and the passenger door remained open, swinging slightly in the hot wind. I slowed down and stopped at a safe distance, leaving the hazard lights on. Outside, the scene seemed too quiet. No driver, no movement in the cab, no radio playing. The only thing alive there was the truck's interior light, cast a faint glow on the rumpled dashboard. I descended slowly, watching each step, without approaching the door directly. I circled around the front, keeping the abandoned truck between me and the woods. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken parts thrown aside. Just a mess of open drawers, scattered documents, and an empty space where a driver's cell phone would normally be. I looked at the trailer and understood quickly. The lock had been removed correctly, without violence. The door was ajar, not forced open. Someone who wants to steal quickly doesn't waste time forcing metal if they can get the victim to cooperate. All it took was for the driver to believe they needed help with some emergency a few kilometers back. I applied what I'd learned over years of listening to stories at the gas station. I went back to my truck, locked the door, pulled out the radio, and called the highway patrol. I told them about the warning triangle, the dead phone battery, the skid marks, and the figure retreating at the edge of the woods. The attendant asked me to stay inside the vehicle, with the headlights on, keeping the abandoned truck in sight, but without getting any closer. I didn't argue with this kind of instruction. I obeyed. While I waited, I noticed the clock. Between my stop at the triangle and arriving there, not many minutes had passed. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. If I had lingered a little longer examining that perfectly staged scene on the road, I would have found the second truck still in motion, being forced to stop the way the criminals wanted. Instead of empty, perhaps I would have seen someone surrendered inside the cab. The patrol cars arrived with their sirens off, using only their flashing lights. 2 officers went straight to the parked truck. 2 others came to speak to me through the window. I repeated everything I had seen, detail by detail, exactly in the order it happened. They exchanged a quick glance, the kind of look of someone who has heard something similar more than once. One of them told me, without going into much detail, that this wasn't the first time they'd found similar signs of roadwork in that area of I-10. Warning triangles, objects left in the center of town, drivers missing for hours, and trucks found empty afterward, with cargo already on its way to some informal warehouse. Hearing that brought no relief. It only confirmed the feeling that I had fallen victim to a crime that was already part of a series. The difference is that, on that particular night, I didn't fall into the role they had prepared for me. Someone behind me did. I was cleared to continue my journey after giving my full details and signing a quick report on the agent's tablet. When I returned to the runway, the night seemed even heavier, as if the darkness had gained weight with everything I now knew. I kept driving to Jacksonville without turning on the radio, without searching for music, without thinking about anything other than the orange triangle shining in my memory. The image of the 3 perfect points on the asphalt, the silent phone in the center, the organized silence around it. Everything arranged to look like a cry for help. The more I replayed the scene in my head, the clearer it became that no accident leaves everything so aligned by chance. And yet I almost fell for it. The hardest part to accept was understanding my own role in it all. I wasn't just the guy who escaped. I was also the guy who walked through the trap, read every detail, and still kept going, leaving everything set up for the next driver. In company meetings, we talk nicely about protocol, about radio warnings, about blocking lanes in risky situations, but in practice you're tired, alone, with a tight deadline, and a voice in the back of your mind telling you it's better not to get involved. I keep thinking about how many other drivers have seen similar scenes, felt the same knot in their stomach, and chosen to continue their journey pretending it wasn't their problem. The road transforms cowardice into survival with frightening ease. The road doesn't give you answers to that kind of guilt. It just keeps going straight, indifferent, as if nothing had happened there. The most it offers is too much time to think while the odometer spins. I arrived at my destination as the sky was beginning to lighten behind the buildings of Jacksonville. I delivered the cargo, signed the papers, answered the usual questions as if I had just completed another ordinary trip. On the outside, everything seemed normal. On the inside, the route had gained a fixed point that will never leave my mind. I'm writing this because I know that many drivers still stop without thinking when they see anything that looks organized in the name of safety. Many people learned to drive back when a triangle on the asphalt only meant a flat tire or an overheating engine, never a warning sign. Today there are route apps, real-time accident alerts, messaging groups with colleagues warning about police checkpoints and robberies, but the old image of the warning sign remains stuck in people's minds as a symbol of help. Whoever sets up this kind of trap knows this memory. They know that an older driver will feel almost obligated to pull over, and that a younger driver doesn't want to carry the guilt of ignoring someone in trouble. If you ever find the road too organized for your own good, remember that you might not be the primary target at that moment. Perhaps you're just the piece that needs to react in the expected way for the plan to work on whoever is coming a few minutes behind. Criminals who work on highways observe behavior in sequence, test patterns, adjust schedules, change routes until they find the exact point where most people stop, get out, and forgo the protection of the cabin. You might get away unscathed, deliver the cargo, and continue with your life. But the decision you made in a few seconds may have placed another person exactly where someone wanted them to be.